Hello, I'm Mike Graziano, and welcome to this series of videos on how to compose a symphony. We're in the middle of composing the second movement. Last time we finished the continuity sketch, the thread that runs through the entire movement, and now we're ready to orchestrate. It's a quiet, pretty, peaceful movement, as a second movement should be. And so we want a light orchestration, lighter than the first movement. For that reason, I left out the two horns. The tiny classical orchestra that we have left contains one flute, two oboes, two bassoons, and a small string orchestra. Two sections of violins, the first and second violins, a section of violas, and a section of cellos. I've left out the string basses here so that our movement can be very delicate, very light. In this video, we'll orchestrate the first part, Melody A, which is all of 18 measures. And we've already begun to sketch in some accompaniment, a quiet little whisper underneath the main tune. The first thing I'll do is move the accompaniment to the violas, and I'll fill in more of it. Just a quiet eighth note motor chugging along, outlining the harmonies. Why the violas? This little accompaniment will need to dip down below the lowest note of the violin, and the violas will come in handy for that. But also, I like violas. They're a wonderful, underused instrument. To me, they have a special kind of sound, a touch of a woody or earthy or soulful sound. Heck, we could put the tune itself in the violas, to great effect. But for a classical symphony, if we're going to be authentic, we better leave the melody in the first violins. I'll put in some bowing marks. Let's listen to these first 8 measures and see how the accompaniment is working for us. Ah, that works nicely. And it's nice to give it a little variety here and there, so it's not always the same robotic arpeggio pattern, or Alberti bass as it's sometimes called. Instead, it has a quiet little mind of its own. But I think we need something in addition, some sustaining notes in the background to blend and smooth the sound. Sustaining notes, that's a fundamental tool in the orchestrator's toolkit. Almost any instrument can hold a sustaining note, and you have to pick the right sound for the moment. Horns are especially common for sustaining notes. They blend beautifully. They can hold one long, quiet note hanging in the background. You barely notice it, and it connects everything together. It became so popular in the late Romantic period that people gave it a name, the blanket of horns. Well, we don't have any horns, because I felt like they would add too much sonic power. We have bassoons instead. They can play many of the same parts that horns do, and bassoons and horns often play together. But bassoons have a thinner, more delicate sound, especially in this upper middle part of the range. And they have a very slightly gritty or incisive quality, unlike the horns. You might think, why do we need a touch of something incisive and gritty underneath our soft and pretty melody? If everything is all soft and squishy, it doesn't work. Imagine petting a soft cat. Very nice. But suppose you found that it was soft all the way through, a squishy blob with no structure, like a catskin bag filled with Vaseline. That would be horrifying. You need your pretty melody to have something more definite underneath. Let's see how that works. It's so delicate, so precise. Let's do something fun and instructive. Let's change the sound from bassoons to horns and listen to the difference. It's not bad, it works perfectly well, but to my ear it has too much power, almost like it's trying to be noble and kingly instead of soft and beautiful. We better put the bassoon sound back in. The hardest part of orchestration is knowing when to stop, to resist the urge to slather on too much. I often tell you that orchestration should be constantly changing, and that's true. But sometimes, if you open up a movement that's quiet and meditative, maybe you want to give it some time to breathe. Let your tune flow with one orchestral sound for the first 8 measures. The next 4 measures repeat the beginning, so let's try putting in the same orchestration and seeing if that works. We've got the flutes up here as a reminder to make this repeat a little more lyrical, more soaring. Not a lot, just a touch. And here's another fundamental truth of orchestration. If you want the music to swell, whether a little or a big crescendo, never do it by just telling the instruments to play louder. It doesn't work. It never sounds good. You need to orchestrate it to change the essential quality of the sound. Here's a few subtle changes I can make. Adding the second violins on that sustaining note, so the strings feel just a touch thicker. And how about making the first bassoon sustain its note through the whole measure? There's probably more to do, but let's listen to what we have so far. It's okay, but I feel like the orchestration is too static. This is a moment of intensity, and one way to enhance the intensity is to keep the sound always changing. Let's do something different in the 3rd and 4th measures here. How about a bit of a bass line in the cellos? The bottom of the string orchestra comes in for the first time. That's a dramatic moment, as the melody unfolds and swells. And because of that larger sound, I'll support the flutes here by adding the oboes. Now the melody will really sing. Let's listen. That works nicely. I think we can tackle the next 6 measures and finish melody A. First, let's fill in the accompaniment, moving it to the violas again. Now let's listen and think about what we want to add. I feel like this part wants to return to a quiet, delicate sound, at least for a moment. Violins, violas, and bassoons, almost like a little chamber music trio. I'll even reduce the bassoons and include only one. That's what the little one means. One lone bassoon hanging onto these delicate sustaining notes. That way we'll get more contrast to the previous section. Contrast is everything. And let's stick in the cellos at the end. It helps make that cadence nice and firm to give it that bass line. Melody A has ended. It has landed. It's an important moment and needs its lower register to stand on. Now let's listen and see what else we'd like to do. How about, to keep the sound changing, we add a little bit of oboe color here, just a tiny little dab of color. The bassoons and violas are playing that upward fourth, but now the oboes add a bit of bright color to it to make it stand out, like a little sparkle of light. And at the end, again, just to keep the sound always changing, let's add color to the violin melody by doubling it in the flutes and oboes. It prevents the sound from getting monochrome. It's like painting your house. The walls are white, the doorways are red. Put in some contrast and color. There are so many different woodwind sounds we can plug in here. Individual instruments or combinations. Try different ones and pick whatever works for you. Now let's listen to the whole movement so far, all of Melody A. See how nicely that works? I'm really happy with it. I want to make 3 points. First, it's so sparingly orchestrated. You might think it basically isn't orchestrated at all. But actually, this is the hardest, most subtle kind of orchestration to do. Carefully putting in just enough and no more. Orchestration should be as economical as possible. Second, and this point really follows from the last one, anyone can do this. You can do this. If I learned it, you can. Orchestration is a learnable skill, and ramping it up to a really big orchestra is not hard. It's just a matter of degree. All the same principles are at work, and we'll get to a big orchestra in some future lesson, I'm sure. And third, here's a subtlety I want to point out. Sometimes in orchestration, a specific instrument becomes the power player. It comes in and gives power to special moments. Usually that instrument is the trumpets or the trombones, but whatever it is, if you have a power player, it works in inverse proportion to how often you use it. Use it a lot throughout the piece, and it loses all its power. Use it sparingly, and every time it has an entrance, it'll have an oomph and a meaning. Here, unexpectedly to me, the cellos are turning into the power player. Who would have thought? At least so far, when the low string bass line comes in, it signifies a moment of special intensity. A consequence is that the violas have turned into the workhorse for the bass line. That makes for a very light sound. The string orchestra loses its rich, deeper tones. Maybe that's the personality of the movement. Sometimes you discover, as you write, that a movement has a personality. You get to know it, and you figure out what it needs and wants. In this case, it's asking us for a light sound infused with the spirit of the violas. But as we move into the next section, the B part, we'll discover a different character, and the music will ask us for something else. We'll find out what that is next time. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please join me for the next one. As always, thank you for watching.